On November 16, 1532, an empire of 10 million people collapsed in less than 2 hours, and not a single invader lost his life. It stands as one of the most lopsided, shocking, and brutal military encounters in human history. To understand how this happened, we have to travel to the high Andes Mountains of South America, home of the Inca Empire. This civilization stretched more than 2,500 miles along the spine of a continent. It had engineered roads that crossed impossible terrain, massive stone cities built without mortar, and farming systems so organized they could feed millions across wildly different climates and altitudes. At the center of this vast world sat Atahualpa, the absolute ruler of the Inca. To his people, he was not merely a king, he was a living god, the son of the sun itself. He had just clawed his way through a brutal civil war against his own brother and emerged victorious. He stood at the very peak of his power, commanding loyalty across an empire larger than any in Europe at the time. Now enter Francisco Pizarro, an illiterate Spanish adventurer driven by hunger for gold and glory. His force was almost laughably small, just 168 men, and only 62 of them mounted on horses. Between them they carried 12 primitive matchlock guns known as arquebuses and 4 small brass cannons. They were thousands of miles from any reinforcement, deep in territory they barely understood. On paper, their expedition looked like nothing short of suicide. Pizarro and his men pushed up through steep mountain passes until they finally descended into the valley of Cajamarca. What they saw from the cliffs above stopped them cold. The hillsides were blanketed with white tents, so dense it looked like a field of fresh snow. This was the camp of Atahualpa's royal army, 80,000 battle-hardened warriors resting below. Some of the Spanish soldiers were so terrified they soiled themselves on the spot. Retreat wasn't an option either. If they turned back through the mountains, they'd be hunted down and slaughtered before they ever reached the coast. Pizarro understood he could never win a straight fight. He needed cunning instead of strength. He borrowed a strategy that had already worked for Hernán Cortés in Mexico: capture the ruler himself. He sent a small band of riders ahead to meet Atahualpa and invite him to a friendly gathering in the central plaza of Cajamarca. Atahualpa accepted without hesitation. Why wouldn't he? He commanded 80,000 soldiers. These strange, filthy, exhausted foreigners posed no threat at all. In fact, Atahualpa was already planning to capture the Spaniards himself, seize their strange horses, and offer the men as sacrifices to the sun god. The next morning, Pizarro set his trap. Cajamarca was a walled town built around a large open square with only 3 narrow exits, a natural bottleneck. Pizarro tucked his infantry and cavalry into the shadows of the buildings ringing the empty plaza. He placed his 4 cannons on a raised platform overlooking the square. Then he ordered total silence. His men crouched in the dark for hours, nerves stretched to breaking. By afternoon, the royal procession finally arrived, and it was a staggering display of wealth and ceremony. Thousands of nobles walked ahead of the emperor, sweeping the road clean. Their robes shimmered with gold and silver thread. Musicians filled the air with pipes and drums. At the heart of it all rode Atahualpa, carried on a golden litter lined with brilliant parrot feathers, wearing an emerald necklace and a crown crafted from feathers. His full army waited just outside the city walls, but he brought only about 7,000 attendants into the plaza itself, and, as a gesture of peace, most of them were unarmed, carrying nothing more than small bronze axes and wooden clubs tucked beneath their tunics. As the procession filled the square, Atahualpa looked around, puzzled. The plaza stood completely empty. Where were the foreigners hiding? Then a lone figure stepped out of the shadows, a Spanish priest named Vicente de Valverde, holding a wooden crucifix in one hand and a breviary in the other. He approached the golden litter and announced that he came as a messenger of a great king across the ocean, and of the one true God. Atahualpa, he declared, must abandon his gods, accept Christianity, and submit to the Spanish crown. Atahualpa's fury was immediate. He demanded to know by what authority the priest dared speak this way. Valverde handed him the holy book. Atahualpa had never encountered a book before. He didn't understand paper, didn't understand writing. He pressed it to his ear, expecting to hear a voice. When nothing came, he hurled the book to the ground in disgust and warned that the Spaniards would answer for every insult they had brought into his land. Valverde spun around and sprinted back toward the hidden Spanish troops, screaming that the sacred scripture had been thrown to the earth. Pizarro gave the signal, a single wave of a white scarf. An explosion of sound tore through the silence as all 4 Spanish cannons fired directly into the packed crowd. Iron shot ripped through the assembled Inca, smoke choked the square, and trumpets shrieked over the screaming. 62 armored cavalrymen thundered out of the buildings, bells clanging on their horses' harnesses. The Inca had never seen a horse in their lives. To them these seemed like monstrous demons. The riders slashed through the crowd with steel swords while gunpowder, thunder, and terror triggered total panic. The unarmed attendants tried to flee, but the exits were sealed. A crush of bodies slammed into one stone wall with such desperate force that the wall itself gave way, crushing and trampling hundreds. Spanish infantry poured in behind the cavalry, steel cutting through cotton armor and flesh with terrible ease. Pizarro had eyes for only one target. He drove his horse through the carnage toward the golden litter. The nobles carrying Atahualpa refused to drop him even as Spanish blades hacked off their hands and arms. They kept the litter aloft on their shoulders until the very end. Finally Pizarro reached him, seized his arm, and hauled him down to the ground. In the confusion, a Spanish soldier swung his sword toward the emperor. Pizarro threw himself in the way to protect his prize, taking a cut to the hand, the only Spanish wound of the entire massacre. By sunset it was over. The plaza was heaped with bodies, more than 7,000 Inca dead, not one Spaniard lost. Outside the walls, the 80,000-strong army did nothing at all. Their living god was gone, their chain of command shattered, and without orders from above they simply melted away. Atahualpa, now a prisoner, quickly grasped what his captors truly wanted. He offered a bargain. He would fill his cell, 22 feet long, 17 feet wide, with gold as high as he could reach, and fill it twice more with silver. Pizarro agreed. For 8 months, llama caravans streamed in from every corner of the empire, loaded with gold and silver treasures, statues, plates, ornaments, all melted down into bars. It became the largest ransom ever paid in human history. But once the gold arrived, Pizarro had no intention of freeing him. Fearing rebellion, he staged a sham trial on invented charges of treason and murder. On July 26, 1533, Atahualpa was executed. Leaderless, the Inca Empire crumbled soon after. One afternoon was enough to bring down an empire of 10 million people. It's a stark reminder of what asymmetrical technology, surprise, and cultural collision can do, and of how the fate of millions can turn on the choices made in a single day.